So let's get to the second question, even though I know I've asked you several already, but the second question I want to ask you. So in your book, The Business of Expertise, you talk about all the ways in which consultants or service providers devalue their own work and offers. And I was wondering if you could share some of the traps people fall into, signs that people are devaluing their work and how they can avoid doing that. Because this is something that I see all the time. And the simplistic way is everyone's like, oh, you're not charging enough. Charge a little more than you're comfortable with. But how do you help somebody recognize, and what are the mistakes in terms of people devaluing their own work?
Yeah, there's probably 24 of them, but where it starts to show up at the beginning is really me looking at how they prospect, how they conduct the sales conversations. And if they feel like this is a fragile process, that's a bad sign, right? Or they feel like, oh, I can't press too far on this, or I'm going to make an exception on my terms right here, or yeah, we can do that extra thing, right? Instead of just understanding that, listen, you know what you're doing. You have discovered how this works really well. And now you're so not confident that you're going to back off on that. And that's not only good, it's not good for you, it's not good for them, because you know what it takes to do great work. So it's that, not monitoring scope creep, just giving on, oh, can you make this presentation again because this person couldn't be here? Or there's just, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's usually not one big thing. It's just this sense that, oh, this is fragile. If I do, this is going to go away. That's what I see first and most often.
Yeah. And so much of that, I think, is rooted in confidence or lack of confidence and insecurity. So what would you say to somebody, because lots of people struggle with that, right? Whether it's imposter syndrome or insecurity about their own thing. I think it's problematic in anything that anyone does, but it's especially problematic when people are coming to you to be an expert and your insecurity is undercutting your own positioning, or you need them. They want someone who's bringing confidence and expertise to the table. And if your insecurity is undercutting all that, how do people overcome that sort of insecurity or lack of confidence?
It seems like the answer I'm going to give is probably not one you're expecting, or your listeners are expecting. I think the key is to not be driven by this crushing need to feed the machine. So if you have a certain size firm of 6 people or 60 people or whatever, and you feel the pressure to close this new business, you're going to overinvest in the sale. You're going to do all kinds of silly things. Even though it's super uncomfortable to think about, you probably ought to reduce your capacity so that you don't feel this need to feed the machine in a crushing way. If it's just you working and you're afraid you're going to starve unless you land this thing, then just lower your assumptions. Maybe you're just now a half-time advisor and you go get a half-time job somewhere, because this gap between your capacity and your opportunity has to be substantial, because this represents your ability to say no. And once you lose that, then you panic in the sale and it shows up in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. I think the other piece of this devaluing your own work is how to value your work in the first place. And I think that's another thing that people really struggle with, right? Is they go, okay, I'm an expert in X, Y, and Z, and people are going to hire me and I'm going to consult with them with a weekly call or whatever it is. And I guess this gets into pricing a little bit as well, but how do they set an initial value of what their work or their expertise is worth? What tips do you have for that?
Yeah. And if you're trying to establish that at the boundary where this prospect becomes a client, it's almost too late. You need to establish that value before they ever come to you so that doesn't come up. Going back to something you said earlier about the difference between somebody who's been consuming your content and somebody who hasn't. Oh my God, I felt the same way. In fact, I'll always ask somebody on the phone, like, how did we get connected? Did you and if they haven't read a book or they haven't read the emails or whatever, oh no, now they're thinking of me as this undifferentiated expert and I'm going to have to define my value, right? But in the end, what you're looking for, you're never trying to convince somebody of the value. What you're trying to do is to figure out how they perceive the value. You're never afraid of the truth. And if you're not afraid of the truth, the sooner you hear it, the better. And if there's any confusion or hesitancy on their part, bam, get out of there and just don't try to convince them of that.
Yeah. And I think also along those lines, that's where also, whether it's a newsletter or podcast or videos or content or speaking or whatever it is, I think the getting to a place where the difference between I want to hire a consultant or I want to hire a web designer versus I want to hire you shifts the whole that whole perception of value. If you can differentiate yourself through a variety of other things so that you're not just another web designer or whatever it is, right? I talk to people all the time and look at their websites and look at their stuff. And I'm like, I see so often people talking about how good their work is. But like, to me, like that's a baseline, right? If you're a web designer, let's say, or a consultant, you're not the only good consultant out there. Right. Really, it's not a question of convincing people you're good. It's a question of giving them a reason to choose you as opposed to all the other options that are good.
And
right?
they should,
and I think
they should see that. They should see that in your materials. They should feel almost uncomfortable. Oh my God, this person has a camera in my office. And then if there's a conversation, and there probably should only be one or two, that's enough to figure this out. They ought to feel so understood because you have seen this so many times, right? That's what positioning delivers to you. Positioning delivers to you a focus. Focus delivers pattern matching. And that pattern matching communicates value to the prospect because they realize, oh my God, this person really gets me. They understand my world.
Yeah, great.